Okay, so as we start the new year, it made sense to go back to some of the basics of recovery. And so for the next 5 weeks, all of the month of January of 2024, we're going to look at the key principles to the recovery journey, or really some of the bigger ones. There are obviously more things that might be involved in the journey, but we want to look at 5 really key principles. So today we're going to look at isolation and how to break out of it. And as we get going, and this, again, I think a lot of people may know what we mean by isolation, but just to make sure we're setting the stage right, what is isolation? Is it just being alone, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a good place to start, because we don't want people fearing that anytime I'm alone, I'm doing something wrong, that I should never be alone. There's a lot of value in times of being alone and solitude and silence, and we'll talk about that towards the end. But when we're looking at isolation, we're really trying to understand a pattern of disengaging from relationship or intentionally not engaging in relationship. So it could be kind of going either direction, like maybe I'm around people and I choose to just isolate, or I should be moving towards people and I don't, because I'd rather just be alone and figure things out by myself. It's in particular where we see these patterns are related to avoiding difficulty, avoiding hard situations or conversations, avoiding responsibility, maybe avoiding hard work, or avoiding anything that makes us uncomfortable. And we just decide it's just easier to be by myself. And I think some of this can be rooted, particularly if we grew up in Western culture, America and Western societies, it can be rooted in how we were raised. There's this rugged individualism of like, if it's got to be, it's up to me. And I need to do this by myself. And so if I'm hurting, I figure it out by myself. If I have a problem, I fix it myself. If there's something unpleasant about me, I deal with that on my own. And in some ways, even our American Christianity can reinforce that message of it's just you and Jesus in a room, fix all your problems. And yet that's really contrary to what Scripture says. And so I think that's what we want to focus on, that isolation is when I'm doing something intentional to avoid people. And I would add that it's not just physical. So you can be around people and be isolating. It could also be an emotional kind of response of I'm around people a lot, but I'm not really facing the hard things, being honest about myself, engaging in friendship with people I could, even if I'm around people all day long. So it's more a state of mind than it is just your physical location. And again, looking at, am I using withdrawing from relationship as a way to stay safe and maybe to avoid or to deal with my problems by somehow numbing out in other ways.
The visual I always get with isolation is just stiff arming, that it's this idea of I'm stiff arming difficulty in life or relationships or whatever, but it's and I like the nuance that you're creating there, that it may not be like hyper intentional, that I know I'm shoving this thing away. It could be something limbically that we have going on because our family of origin, or what you've already talked about, the way we were raised, the culture that we were in. But that's always like watching the NFL. I feel like stiff arms aren't a thing anymore in the NFL, but you used to see that, like really good running backs would just stiff arm someone, and it is not allowing other people or certain situations or emotions to get close. At least that's the way I've thought about it.
Yeah. Well, and it may be helpful too to make sure that we distinguish it from having boundaries or appropriate distance between us and other people, because there are, I think, those that can be people pleasers that can get lost in enmeshment with others, and they really don't have great concepts of where do I end and where do you begin. And I'm so enmeshed with people that I don't really know how to get distance. And so in that regard, in some ways, we do need healthy boundaries of, I don't let everybody in. That there are people, it's appropriate that they don't know my whole story all the time, and that might feel like a stiff arm. But maybe that's intentional, because that's a vulnerable place, and not everybody has earned the right to be in some of those vulnerable spaces. But it's looking at, again, I would use the word pattern. Is this kind of the pattern of how I deal with things and deal with people? As I just distance myself, remove myself. I just don't go there. And maybe I realize I don't go there with anyone, or rarely ever, because it feels safer. And that's where we would begin to say, man, this is some isolation that might be working against me.